Hello, hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Jen. How are you?
Hi, I'm good and you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for being here. I am in Atlanta. Where are you joining us from?
I'm in South Africa, Johannesburg.
Wow. Amazing, amazing, amazing. So thank you so much for being here and everyone who's coming in. We want this to be a open environment where if you have questions or if you have a comment, please, please, please feel free to share it in the chat. We have a special guest. You are a self taught advocate and you advocate for healing and personal growth. Does that stem from your own past and personal experience? I'm sure it does. And I would love for you to kind of share your journey of how you got to this place.
Well, I wouldn't say fully self-taught because I'm currently studying at the moment as a somatic sex and relationship coach.
Mhm.
But a lot of my knowledge that I integrate into my practice definitely is self-taught and throughout the time that I've experienced in my own healing journey.
Mhm.
And I must say, what got me into relationship and sex coaching is very much my own desire to heal that wound and for me to get more accustomed and closer to connection and better at connecting with humans and better at learning to understand myself and how do I relate to other people.
Mhm.
So I've been through a long journey of healing. A lot of it came from my depression. I used to have extreme depression when I was younger.
Mhm.
And for a long time, I used to have ups and downs. There will be moments when it's fine and then moments when it comes back. And so that's what got me into a lot of this healing and especially the somatic work in terms of embodiment and working with the body. I found that that is the one thing that has helped me the most, and it helps with everything in terms of how we relate to people, how we connect to people, in terms of our relationship patterns, how do we transform that. It's not only about awareness but also about how do we embody that. And when we
Mhm.
start to embody it and start to teach our body how to feel safe, that's when things start to change.
I completely agree. And I think as a helper, we connect more in an authentic way when we have experienced something in our lives. It comes as like motivation. It comes as like, just this desire to help. And I know when I got into the journey of healing, it's because I had lost someone to suicide. And then when I got into the work of helping people recover from trauma, it's because I realized that I had dealt and recovered from my own trauma. Can you tell us a little bit about as you've been working through healing, have you started to connect your depression to a root cause?
Definitely. It's something that I've always been quite aware of when I started learning about it, and definitely had a lot of abandonment issues as a kid. My grand leaving very suddenly created a big abandonment wound. And so that's, I think, is a quite a big root of my depression. I wouldn't
Mhm.
say it's the only thing, but it definitely was quite a big thing for me and something that I still work on. It's not necessarily that it goes away. I don't believe that we can really get rid of our wounds. And I think that's a lot of people think in the healing that they can get rid of it. So it's more about learning to accept it. But yeah, I definitely learned a lot from that. And that awareness was a starting point. But for me, the awareness was not enough. And that's why the depression kept coming back, because even though I was aware of where it's coming, it wasn't just about awareness. Like I mentioned, also embodiment is what actually then becomes the shift.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mm.
Okay. So if somebody is on this journey of healing, and I heard you talk about abandonment, realizing that abandonment was the fracture in your story. How do we kind of bring in attachment styles? Like how do you bring in, like, what is my attachment style? How can that help me with my healing? Where would someone start?
I think the first thing is, firstly, before we start into that, I just want to also mention that's quite important is that attachment styles are there to help us to understand ourselves better and how we relate. But what's so important is to know that that doesn't define you. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people try to learn this and then think this is what defines me. And the thing is, we're such complex human beings that we can go from one attachment style to suddenly a different attachment style. The same way we can be very anxiously attached to suddenly becoming more securely attached.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in terms of like getting more specific in terms of your question, I would say the first thing is starting to notice how do you act around people in general. Do you generally find yourself leaning in when you're talking to people? Are you very good at eye contact, or do you find yourself like looking away quite often? Those are things that can easily start to define more of the type of style that you relate more to. Are you someone who tries to avoid conflict? If you're avoiding conflict and you don't really like to be very close to people, you're more
Mm-hmm.
likely to fall into an avoidant attachment style.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if someone who can be quite clingy and chasing after love and, wanting attention a lot of the times, then you're more likely to get into the anxious attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's
Mm-hmm.
also like the ambivalent attachment, which is like the fearful avoidant. It's like a mix between the anxious and avoidant, which can be a bit of a tricky one. So, but it's more of that sense of you're desiring closeness so much, but then the minute you're having the closeness, there's this intense fear of wanting to like further yourself back, and then you're coming back in and then going back out. So you can often find yourself in different ones. Like even me, I found myself quite often, I'm more in an anxiously attached style, but I've also found myself in the ambivalent attached style. And then I've also now, because I've worked through a lot of the stuff, I've also become a lot more secure and able to communicate these things and
Mm-hmm.
share these emotions. And that's also what helps you get out of those attachment styles.
Yeah. So if you're listening, I want to just give you some background knowledge and understanding on attachment styles. So the theory says how we were rendered in our very early childhood, sometimes before we can even remember, how we were attended to by our parental figures determines how we respond later on in our adult relationships. And it's on a continuum. Like some people touch different styles or different attachment styles depending on if it's a, work relationship, personal relationship. But the main attachment styles are secure, which only maybe 1 in 3 people are actually secure or can work to become secure. There's anxious, anxious attachment style, in which you kind of present sometimes as clingy or needing reassurance in your relationships. You enjoy being in relationships, but you worry maybe that they could possibly end at any moment. And maybe your caregiver, maybe there was a fracture in your story of abandonment, or your emotional needs were not met. And there's avoidance meaning there's a bit of a wall. You're a bit afraid of maybe being hurt in relationships, and so maybe you've built up a coping mechanism of kind of being a little bit avoidant or guarded or harder to warm up. And then there's a mix. So you mentioned that you early on found that your primary style was anxious attachment. What were some of the characteristics that you showed, or how did you present in relationships?
Definitely, I would find myself going after people who were less interested in me, which is that anxiously avoidant dance.
Mhm.
And I would also find myself becoming quite clingy in the relationship and needing more reassurance and getting anxious whenever a partner of mine would like move further away, like distance themselves. I would then get more anxious.
Mhm.
And I also struggled to be alone a lot of the times.
Yeah. I definitely understand going after people who are not available, not, that whole kind of chase, that dance of, I know that they may not be who I need, or somebody might say, I'm not really looking for anything serious, but
Mm.
you're fully aware that you're looking for a real commitment. Why do you think that people do that dance? Like, what do you think, or how have you grown past, the stage of, realizing that this person is not emotionally available, is not meeting my needs, and therefore, and not just in a romantic relationship, but therefore I need to pivot?
I think that's a great question. And I think in terms of that is realizing that, well, firstly, when someone tells you something, believe them, because that's what they mean. And if they're
Mhm,
showing you something, that is how they're going to be. Don't try to have a fantasy of how you want them to be, because that's not going to happen. They are
mhm,
literally showing you the truth. But also, in terms of why we want to connect to that, is because from early childhood, like you said, we have certain patterns that start to develop and form in our attachment styles. And because of that, we're used to that format. So as adults, we feel a lot safer in a situation like that. Consciously, we're aware this actually is not good for us, this is not safe, but subconsciously it feels safe and it feels better and it feels nice. And that's why we're like, but why wouldn't we want something that feels good? It feels good to us, so it makes more sense, right? So
mhm.
that's why we end up doing those types of things. We end up chasing the person who's not interested in having a serious relationship, but you are. And I think, like I said, with them, I'm going to bring up embodiment a lot of the times, because it's the biggest factor that really helps you through that. And that is what changes everything. When you learn to do, I think, understand, like, awareness is the most important thing, understanding what is your attachment style. And that comes to questioning yourself and questioning, what are the things that I do that get me into these patterns. What are my patterns? Everyone has patterns, and understanding our patterns is what really teaches us. It's what we need to see. So
Mhm.
not hating on those patterns, and rather actually being curious about those patterns, will help us to be aware of them. And that's the first step. And then the second thing is, then after awareness, we need to work on, what are the things that I can do to take myself out of that pattern. And for instance, for me with anxious attachment, it was learning to be okay with myself, learning to feel safe and do self soothing techniques, things that will help me feel that being alone is perfectly good and perfectly safe, and that I don't need someone to feel good and safe, and
Mhm.
that it's more of a choice that you want someone around you. And so that is something where you learn to get better at, as well as disappointment. Anxiously attached people struggle with disappointment a lot. And learning to be able to sit with the disappointment, asking for your needs, but also knowing that sometimes you will be disappointed, because not everyone can meet those needs all the time. So being able to sit with the disappointment is also important.
Yeah.
And there's many, as well as, like, I can also mention for in terms of avoidant, when you're
Well,
an
look,
avoidant.
I want to stay on attachment
Okay.
for just a little bit longer, because in working with um people, I feel like this is the category that I see the absolute most, right? And
Mhm.
the reason why is
You
because
mean
I think
anxiously attached?
anxious attachment.
Mhm.
I've seen so many people struggle with anxious attachment because they struggle to trust their own self-worth. Right?
Yes.
So if you are struggling to trust your own self-worth, then of course you're seeking constant validation from your outside partners, or from your friends, or from
Mhm.
your boss, because you have not built up the level of trusting your own self-worth. And it is so emotionally exhausting. So tell me how your work would help somebody who is struggling with self-worth and struggling with being alone, like what are some takeaways for them?
So definitely learning how to work with your inner child. That's one of my favorite techniques, is going back to your inner child and learning how do you connect your adult self with your child self, because we all have an inner child and we still carry that, and a lot of our reactions come from our inner child. Whereas when we as an adult start to connect with that little child within us, we start to feel more safe, and we start to soothe ourselves and learn that actually I'm in charge, I'm the adult, I know you're there, I hear you, I love you, and let me like meet your needs, but I am in charge because I'm going to lead us the right direction. And so when you're
Mhm.
able to do that, you as an adult have more maturity to react better. Whereas
Mhm.
it's no longer your inner child reacting to certain situations. So that's why it's one of my favorite. And I think it's the most healing and rewarding when it comes to that. And, just connecting with that and learning more self-soothing techniques where you can, like, such as tapping the body is really nice, shaking the body, doing things like that can really help you to connect better and
Mhm.
release those emotions, regulating your emotions.
Mhm. Mhm. If you're
Yeah.
listening and you've never heard of inner child, or you're like, "What are they talking about?" Me talk to myself, and I'm the adult and this is the child. It was a very different concept for me to understand, when I was going through the training. And so I
Mhm.
want to I want to break it down like this. There is a there is a wounded child in all of us, right? Because we enter this world and we are blank slates. We're excited. And then as we go through life, we have certain fractures that kind of, think of a fracture as something that is a hard hit, a hard reality. Maybe that hard reality came before your time. Maybe it was not age appropriate. Maybe it was not something that your parents wanted you to see or know. Maybe it was something completely outside of the control, but you got kind of a jolt, right? And that jolt hurt that child. You were a child and it hurt you. It stays with you. It stays with you so
Mm.
very long. It stays with you. I can remember being in preschool. I went to a private Catholic preschool. I was the only little Black girl there. And I will never forget. I stood up to say something, and the teacher said, "Are you stupid?" And that stuck. That still feels so real to me, right? And so when you're saying go back to the inner child, that means anytime I have an insecurity that I'm not good enough or I'm not smart enough, I have to realize that that is because of what I heard at that age. And so it's okay for me to say, that was then, you didn't have the language to defend yourself. You're not stupid. You're beautiful. You're bright. She was completely out of line for saying that to you. Look at how far you've come. That is a tangible way to actually talk to and soothe the inner child. So you may have different instances. Maybe someone said you're fat or you're ugly or you were bullied or you saw abuse. That was a fracture. And so anytime a insecurity comes up or you're triggered now, think back and ask yourself, did something happen to me as a child, and what would I have needed then that I couldn't give myself now? And that's what you're talking about when you say, like, go back and soothe the inner child. Okay,
Yeah.
now we're ready to move
That's
on
a
to avoid.
perfect explanation.
So now we're ready
Mhm.
to move on to avoidance. Okay, let's spend some
Mm.
time on avoidance. How would someone know? How would they present in relationship? Tell them what avoidance looks like.
So avoidance would often, they like to avoid conflict. They don't really enjoy conflict a lot of the times. They can be quite independent, and in the way that it's to the point where they don't want help at all. They feel
Mhm.
much safer doing everything on their own, and in that way it feels safe. They feel safe regulating and working with their emotions by themselves and not expressing them to others. And that's where they struggle. They struggle to get more connected to the other person. And
Mhm.
that's where the person feels like, oh, they're very distant from me.
Mhm.
When actually it's not that they really want to be distant. It's just that they don't feel safe if they come closer. They don't feel safe sharing their emotions. It's more in that way. The same way that the anxiously attached feels safer when they're more connected rather than disconnected.
Mhm.
So it comes out in those ways.
Mhm. So think somebody who's super independent. I don't need help. I can do it on my own. You know, I
Mm,
don't feel safe being vulnerable. It's kind of like you've got a wall around to protect yourself, but you
yeah.
do desire, you do deep down you desire to be in relation with people,
Mm,
but it takes a long time for you to let someone in, right?
yes, definitely.
Okay. All right. What are some tips? Like this is a big group. I can think of like I don't want to like I can think of Miss Independent and I can think of Mr. like I'm good by myself. So like what are
Mm.
some tips?
I would say the opposite of what anxiously attached have to do, because anxiously is more learning how to be okay with yourself and find that security inside of yourself, whereas the avoidant is finding more security with others, with
Mhm.
loved ones, leaning more into the relationship. The minute you feel like you're wanting to run away or to be by yourself and deal with your emotions by yourself, that is the perfect moment to be like, actually, let me tell my partner right now I feel like I'm about to avoid this, but instead I want us to try and communicate this. I'm feeling this certain way, you
Mhm.
know. Try use those moments, and also co-regulation, learning how to regulate with your partner, doing
Mhm.
self-soothing techniques with your partner so that you can start to feel more safe and teach your body that it actually is safe connecting with another person.
Right. I find
Mm.
that people who struggle to be vulnerable have been hurt in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Um, have been made to feel like their feelings don't matter. And
Yeah.
now because they've been shut down so many times, then they have a difficult time trusting people. And
Mm.
so I want to say that if you are feeling like you identify with the avoidant style, I want to let you know that there are people who are safe. There are people who won't use you and mistreat you and abuse you, and you have the experience now to recognize the red flags. I want you to lean on your intuition. I want you to lean on the Holy Spirit to guide you. I want you to pray for discernment so that you can know who is in front of you and who you can trust to open up, because you're right. Not everybody deserves to have full access to you, but by you not letting anyone in at all, you might be missing an opportunity, meaningful connection. So if
Mm.
that's you, I hear you, I see you, I know what you've been through, but there are people who won't mistreat you and won't abuse you. So I really wish we had time to get through all of the attachment styles. And I know there are people who are like, oh, like this is so good, you know. Tell them a little bit about what you do and how you can help them and where they can find you.
So at the moment, anyone who wants to work with me can find me on my Instagram at Jen's Wholeness Hub. And basically, what I do is I mostly work online, and it's all coaching with embodiment. It's about learning how to feel sensations, notice the things in your body, what's going on when you feel a certain emotion. And in my coaching sessions, it's about practicing things that you can bring into your real life experiences. So obviously, we'll also start with awareness, bringing in awareness about anything that it is that you're struggling with in terms of relationships or sexuality.
Mhm.
And then once there's more awareness, we work with a lot of empathy. Empathy is a really important thing, and something that also, when you learn to empathize with yourself, is what brings in a lot of healing.
Mhm.
And then doing a lot of the embodiment practices and practices that you can learn how to bring into your real life, like role playing. We do a lot of role playing so that if you're in a situation where you don't know how to express your needs or boundaries, you can now do that with me, for instance, so that you can learn to feel safe again, to express yourself. And whatever situation it is in that moment, you will know how to react better when you are in a real life situation like that.
Amazing. Because I think that people are now inundated with information. I feel like we have a lot of information and not a lot of wisdom. And when I say wisdom, is how to actually apply it to my day-to-day life. And so the fact that you are like, this is a situation, let's tackle it in real time. How are you feeling? Let's role play how you're going to hang up with me and go practice this in real time. I think that that's what people need right now. And so I'm so grateful for the work that you do. This platform is all about connecting people with a helper. Doesn't have to be me, right? You identify with something that she said, reach out to her. If you feel like I need therapy, I need to really figure out what some of these childhood connections and ties are and to work some of this, and you want to work with a therapist, feel free to reach out to me or someone, just anyone. I think the point is we want you to understand how your attachment style is showing up in your relationships. And so thank you so much for being here. I truly
Thank you for
appreciate the
having me.
conversation. If you have heard something that resonates with you and you have a question and you were like, I don't want to put my business in the street right on alive, connect with us offline. We'd be happy to answer your questions or your concerns. If you're a helper and you're watching, you're like, I have a strategy or a topic that I would like to pour into people. I'm here every Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time, and I would love to have you on. Or if you're on the other side and you have been through a traumatic situation or trauma or a relationship, and you have a testimony that you want to share, I also invite you on this platform as well. So thank you, everyone, for watching. Please share this with someone who you believe that it could help, and have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It was lovely meeting you.